I decided to make this video because I saw a video by Kevin Logan that showed a mix of all the far-right people and organizations that supported Donald Trump. Everyone from the KKK to the KGB supported him. I could imagine that people who disagree with this video would say that it's all guilt by association. Therefore, I decided to show that Trump does have some fascist elements in his message. Please, watch this video with an open mind and feel free to debate the accuracy of my claims.
Conservatives instinctively understand the value of tradition and authority, and of course liberals want to tear all those things down.
It's funny when people say that Donald Trump isn't from the political class, especially since he has donated millions of dollars to political campaigns over the years. Since Trump was elected, the dominant conservative narrative says that real Americans stood up to establish big media and big money interests by electing Trump. Yes, they stood up to the establishment by electing a billionaire who has been on television for thousands of hours over the span of 30 years. Yep, Trump's first television appearance was in 1980. Another absurd myth is that the media was against Trump. John Legend and Bill Maher exposed this better than I ever could.
They didn't fairly cover him for a long time during this during this campaign.
Fairly?
They fucked up. Because fairly means actually assessing his statements, whether they're true or not, investigating his foundation, which they didn't start doing till the end, investigating all the dealings his companies had with
They covered
foreign
the
entities.
emails more than any,
So finally,
all the issues combined.
right.
Fact-checking sites have noticed that Trump lied more than twice as much as Clinton. The Fourth Estate has failed us. Make no doubt about it, Trump's hard-right rhetoric was favorable from everybody in the KGB to the KKK. But does this really make him a fascist? I wonder. Because prior to running for this election, Trump espoused more moderate and even liberal views to the press.
Everybody's got to be covered. This is an un-Republican thing for me to say.
Universal health care.
I am going to take care of everybody.
Who pays for it?
The government's going to pay for it. The government's going to pay for it. This tax would raise approximately $5.7 trillion. In many cases, I probably identify more as a Democrat. I hate the concept of guns. I'm not in favor of it.
Why are you joining the Reform Party?
I really believe the Republicans are just too crazy right. I mean, hey, I lived in New York City and Manhattan all my life, okay? So, you know, my views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa, perhaps.
Partial birth abortion. Would President Trump ban partial birth abortion?
Well, look, I'm very pro-choice.
But you would not ban it?
No.
Or ban partial birth abortion?
No, I am pro-choice in every respect. This is an un-Republican thing for me to say.
Who do you think would be the best qualified to make a deal with Iran?
Hillary's always surrounded herself with very good people. I think Hillary would do a good job.
Well, I thought he did a great job tonight. I thought he was strong and smart, and it looks like we have somebody that knows what he's doing. And it's a strong guy who really knows what he wants, and this is what we need.
Hillary's a great friend of mine. Her husband is a great friend of mine. I think Hillary is going to take it, and I think Hillary is very, very capable. I'm very pro-choice, a liberal in health care.
Universal health coverage.
I like universal. As far as single payer, it works in Canada. It works incredibly well in Scotland. It just seems that the economy does better under the Democrats.
Conservatives instinctively understand the value of tradition and authority.
So, who is the real Donald Trump? Obviously, lately, he's been pandering to people's darker nature. Is it possible that Trump became this right-wing demagogue? Unfortunately, at this point, I have to point out to some people that fascism is a conservative political ideology. Jonah Goldberg and others make the mistaken conclusion that fascism and liberalism are the same thing because they share some economic similarities. This is misleading. Fascism is culturally conservative. Even socialism and communism can be culturally conservative. Consider Vladimir Putin. Even though he is now in the Russia First Party, he's pretty much still a communist, and he's culturally conservative. In fact, Eastern European politics often combine cultural conservatism with communism. There is nothing in orthodox Marxism that supports gay rights, the equality of men and women, and anti-racism. People who disagree with this are the ones who are likely to tell you that Hillary Clinton is a cultural Marxist who would have converted us all to Islam and castrated every man who opposed their totalitarian state. Big sister. Sorry about that little tangent. Up next, I'm going to play a clip from The Daily Show that shows what Trump and fascism have in common.
A cult of action, a celebration of aggressive masculinity, an intolerance of criticism, a fear of outsiders, intense nationalism, and resentment at national humiliation. Now, it's hard to keep all those things in mind, but I've come up with a handy mnemonic device. You just listen to things said by Donald Trump.
I get things done better than anybody.
They're fed up with those guys back there, the media. They are the worst. They're the worst.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters.
A total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. He's walking out like big high fives, smiling, laughing. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. We never win. We just don't win. We are going to make America great again.
It's obvious that Trump meets many of the criteria on the fascism checklist. However, many of these conditions have popped up in places where there have been very little threats of fascism. For example, there's been some fascism in the United States, but it was never a widespread problem. Why is this? I'm going to explain this by looking at an essay written by Umberto Eco from the New York Review of Books. Keep in mind that he says fascism is a fuzzy totalitarianism. That is, unlike Nazism, it doesn't have a very coherent ideology. The title of Eco's essay is Fascism, and it lists the conditions that a fascist regime needs to take root. Eco writes in the essay that the left has, at times, used the word fascist as an insult. Therefore, I am going to use the term fascist less as an insult and more as a way of describing Trump and the social and economic realities that brought him into power. Now, of course, I'm going to be necessarily selective. For one, I need to be for brevity. Second, many of the criteria can be ascribed to both the left and the right. I'm going to stick to the elements that are particular to Donald Trump's case. You will notice that these overlap with Trevor Noah's presentation. I think it's highly unlikely that Donald Trump could become a fascist dictator of the United States without some kind of great catastrophe or war. However, I really need to point out three essential conditions that will consolidate his power. I've been calling these conditions, but it might be better to think of them as categories. I've categorized Umberto Eco's 16 features of fascism into three categories. They are nationalism, classism, and sexism. Keep in mind that treating his features this way is inherently reductionist. That is, important aspects like racism are woven throughout the three categories. I am focusing on culture. I generally look at complex historical events in terms of political, economic, and social realities. However, I've found fascism to be unequivocally culturally conservative. I'll begin with the relationship of Trump's potential fascism to nationalism. If you have trouble understanding nationalism, Google the words tribalism and globalism along with it. I've said before that every modern nation state has at least some sense of nationalism. Likewise, nationalism doesn't always lead to fascism. However, fascists are aggressively nationalistic, to the point that militarism seems appropriate. I think this quote is interesting. For fascism, disagreement is treason. Now consider that Ann Coulter wrote a book called Liberal Treason. Wow, and they call the left bullies. It's no surprise that Trump also supported the Brexit. For all its faults, the European Union evolved from trade agreements that were meant to prevent the balkanization of Europe that resulted in fascism. Likewise, modern-day fascist European groups oppose the European Union. Now, it's important to note that nationalism and racism usually go hand in hand. It's funny that right-wing politics like Paul Joseph Watson say that Islam isn't even a race. I think it's funny because if an Middle Eastern-looking guy were to confront Watson, he would assume that the man is Muslim just by his physical features. The second category is classism. Now, before I go any further, I would like to look at a direct quote from Umberto Eco. Fascism derives from individual or social frustration. That is why one of the most typical features of the historical fascism was the appeal to a frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation, and frightened by the pressure of lower social groups. In a time when the old proletarians are becoming petty bourgeois, and the lumpen are largely excluded from the political scene, the fascism of tomorrow will find its audience in the new majority. This is very interesting. When it talks about lower social groups, you could think about Mexicans and Muslims, even though some Muslims make good money. But conservatives do feel pressure from these lower social groups. What kind of policies could Trump enact that would reflect nationalistic fascism? At the most extreme, he could round up Muslims and put them in internment camps like FDR did to the Japanese in World War II. Now, this one must seem like it's not totally in agreement with this category. Fascism is highly anti-intellectual. It's no secret that Trump's base were uneducated white males. But there's a strain of anti-intellectualism there. Therefore, this quote is important. Distrust of the intellectual world has always been a symptom of our fascism. From Goering's alleged statement, "When I hear talk of culture, I reach for my gun," to the frequent use of such expressions as degenerate intellectuals, egghead, effete snobs, universities are a nest of reds. The official fascist intellectuals were mainly engaged in attacking modern culture and a liberal intelligentsia for having betrayed traditional values. Wow. Now just think about Sargon's petition to end social justice courses. Wow. So close, so right. Nail on the head. Now, I'm certain that Sargon would be one of Trump's biggest apologists, like say if Trump were to round up leftist intellectuals and try to re-educate them, or even lock up Muslims if there was a terrorist attack and Trump rounded up Muslims and put them in camps. I'm sure Sargon would be a big apologist of Trump. And Gavin McInnes certainly would be. He displays the selective populism that was outlined by Umberto Eco. Yeah, to McInnes, he's one of these people who subscribe to Sarah Palin's theory of the real American. To them, the real Americans are rural white people. Sadly, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to be quick with this one. The last category is sexism. Now, I've made these categories, these three, because it's easier to remember them than it is the 16 features of Umberto Eco's essay. And I wanted something myself that I could apply very quickly while watching TV, listening to arguments, and I think that these do serve that purpose. So the last category is sexism. In many ways, fascism is the exact opposite of feminism. This is controversial. Now, this guy on the internet called Tyler Preston had a video called Feminism is Fascism, and I can't think of two more different political ideologies than fascism and feminism. And to conclude this category, I would just, can you imagine Hitler or Mussolini talking about how there's more than two genders, or women should be in the workforce? So to conclude, I would just read one quote to prove my point and show a little clip. This is the origin of machismo, which implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. Since even sex is a difficult game to play, the Earth fascist hero tends to play with weapons. Doing so becomes an earth-satisfic exercise. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that I think it's pretty interesting that Trump got elected. And while I was disappointed, I wasn't out crying, and I think that these people are going around crying. It's giving conservatives what they want. They want to see it cry. And one lie that they're going around saying is that they didn't cry when Obama was elected. They went around saying, not my president, too. They went around saying that Obama was going to be a fascist or Nazi dictator who was going to take away all our guns. They were not gracious in defeat either. So don't listen to them when they mock us or the left progressives. But I'll tell you what, in some ways, sadly, I was kind of relieved. It would have been exhausting to defend Hillary Clinton for 4 years. It wasn't hard to defend Obama, you know? And conservatives threw a fit after Obama was elected. I know that some people would like to say that it doesn't matter who we elect because big money, corporate interests are going to control things anyway. For a while, I subscribed to this line of thinking. And I've studied this elitist line of politics for well over a decade, and I've come to find some faults in this reasoning. While there's some validity to it, it's ultimately a way for political novices to feel smug and to be lazy. They feel smug in the knowledge that they somehow can see through the illusions cast by people more rich and powerful than everyday sheeple, as they call them. It's a form of laziness because then they don't have to deal with complex social issues like abortion, income inequality, gender equality, and racism. In any case, I think it's highly unlikely that Donald Trump will become a fascist dictator, unless there's a big terrorist attack or a huge war. And I could do a whole episode on social media, how social media may or may not prevent something like a fascist dictator from ever taking power. Then again, people might come up with a new, never-before-seen form of authoritarianism that will render the power of social media all but useless. Either way, I'm looking forward to how Trump's presidency will turn out. If nothing else, I'm curious. Then again, if an economic crisis, environmental catastrophe, world war, or massive terrorist attack hits, I will be afraid that Trump could act in an authoritarian manner. So, in conclusion, thank you for watching this video. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. By all means, feel free to comment. Hitting the vote button also gives me some feedback on how the reception of my videos comes across. And enjoy yourself, folks.
Conservatives instinctively understand the value of tradition and authority.